Welcome back to another episode of Who's to Say? I'm your host, Tom Foolery, and despite the sunless weather we've been enduring, I am taking this opportunity to look ahead to what we've referred to as the real new year, the true new year, which is coming up in a few weeks' time in mid-March. And I have the recent budding interest of astrology to thank for that realization, but it's just made that that transparent realization so much more valid to take a step back and not accept everything that we're given in this realm and in this lifetime, especially in terms of the things we take for granted, like time and like the calendar. And this is to say nothing for the moment about the calendar itself, but we are right here. This is the last day of January. It is the longest month. It feels like the longest month, and yet it can also fly by if you have a very engaging, demanding January. And that is somewhat counter to what we're going to talk about today, which is this this phase in anticipation of spring, the true new year. It is very much counter to, and I would say detrimental to the spirit of this time of year when we are supposed to be hunkering down, going in, resting, restoring, recuperating in anticipation of the burst of life that comes in springtime. And it's a level of confusion that it's really disconcerting because, as is going to be a theme throughout this podcast today, that detaches us from our roots, our timeless connection to nature, and what she reveals to us, which is, nothing in nature is deceptive. Nothing in nature is really confusing to her denizens. It may be confusing to us because we don't have every answer to our why questions and our how questions, even though it's the great paradox of the world right now, and especially the world of scientism, that thinks that the world is 99% solved and maybe 1% mystery, and it's probably the exact inverse. We live in a realm that is overwhelmingly mysterious, and I've been reminded by true mystics, wise as they are, brilliant as they were, that it's a much more natural calling in life to revel in the experience of mystery and not not fall into despair when we cannot solve every problem, and especially the greatest mystery of ourselves and who we are. And the best in me believes that when I'm quiet enough to tune into this, the best in me believes that the more we visit nature for some of these reflections, maybe not total answers and revelations, although they can come in that form, but we get these reflections, sometimes literally, if we're lucky enough to be around water still or moving or otherwise. I'm going to talk about one of the legends of the field of water relationship and discovery, Victor Schauberger. But I'm so fired up about this in anticipation of spring, not to just skate over the frozen ice of wintertime, but we need to prepare. And again, this, to come back to this issue of the false new year, I see it create this certainly this heightened sense of stress and urgency. That now all the narrative around, again, time, and you don't have time, and I get all that. I get some of the reality to you only have one life to live, YOLO and all that shit, but these are morsel truths. These are half truths that, if we buy into them wholeheartedly, you take the YOLO, for example, to offset that with the belief in reincarnation and the belief in past lives and especially an eternal spirit, then I like to think that takes some pressure off of what we do in this life. And yet, of course, we want to maximize the ratio of who we could be and who we are and what we do. I think that's a beautiful definition of success, which is basically closing that potential gap. And whenever a new year on the calendar comes around, it ratchets up that urgency and intensity that I think is certainly misplaced in the wintertime when heat is not abundant. The free energy of a springtime or a summer or an early fall is not as available that we would get from not just pervasive sunshine, but also the reemerging life that would surround us in a spring and summer. Of course, fall is supposed to be that downward slope into the rest and digest state. Also, the state of death, which is what we're going to be diving into a little bit today. We won't be visiting every nook and cranny of the underworld right now, but that is what we know winter for, and longer night, having a more regular and early presence of the moon, which is somewhat symbolic of death, but not in the way that I want to talk through this with you all for my own benefit, of course, to make sure that I have a useful understanding of this, because I accept that death is part of this life. And especially when we get the micro examples of this just in a circadian cycle, in a 24-hour cycle that includes a moon cycle. I mean, our sense of schedule and our sense of calendar is about waking hours and working hours and before work and after work and weekdays and weekends, and it's just so painfully misguided from what is accessible to us in a less rigid context, meaning that if you think about your day and your week or your year in a broader context, if we talk about the day, for instance, as we are in the circadian cycle, knowing that that's a 24-hour cycle that we should be engaging with. For instance, I mean, we write sleep off as this time where we're not doing anything, and so it's to be discarded. True enough, you may be dreaming beautifully, I hope you are, but knowing that from approximately 10:30 to 10 to 2, 10:30 to 2:30, somewhere in there, we get our physical repair. So when we stay up beyond that, especially as we get anything in the AM, anything to 12 or later, with any consistency, is a massive disruption to your physical reset. So that's not, that's your tissues and your organs and your skin and your hair and your bones, everything. Especially if you're an athlete, that is free medicine. That's free recovery there. And then from 2:30 to our rise, call it between 6 and 7, that's the psychological repair. And if we are missing out on that time because we don't have the momentum of several hours of deep rest priming us for that sort of that refresh, that reset, where it is something of a death to surrender to sleep like that. And of course, we know our bodies need that with how frequently our cells die and turn over, our skin tissues, our hair. Really every part of us is constantly in change, and change is associated with death and then rebirth. If we don't grant that gift to our minds as well, then we do leave ourselves open to identifying during the day, the following day, more of an identity with the past, I think. And so to tie this again into the astrological influence and these larger cycles that we are distracted from, I would say. I mean, you take astrology, for instance, it's either completely bastardized in a very very elementary cultural way, again, in just a horoscope and whatever your birth sign is, that gives you the whole story. I mean, I'm certainly a novice, but I'm already edified by the nuance of astrology. And, I saw, like I did in the Australian episode, I love to play with it and test myself and get into some of the minutiae a little bit. But again, it's not used as the art and science that it could be in the main. And I think that time is turning around, so we'll see. Uh, but again, I mean, we are robbed of these tools that could give us access to portals that take us, and I don't mean this from the character of escapism. That's not what I'm getting at here. We would still be in this realm. We would still be in this experience. But as this stunning quote attributed to Rudolf Steiner, Steiner said, "To know something, you must walk a circle around it and observe it from 12 angles." And right there you have someone who is a genuine mystic putting voice to the essential utility of an astrological perspective. We've spoken about this before, the astral realm being indicative of our timelessness. That we are, there's so much about our synapses and our neuroconnective networks from our brain that of course are related to our blood, which is the water of our life. And I've talked about this before, the electrolyte component, how we're able to transfer information in cellular processes through mineral content in the blood, in the fourth phase of water, which is cellular water. These are all connected to the stars and the planets and our sun and moon, our local sun and moon, I should say. And I'll expand on that another time. But the point I'm driving home before we get into some of this discussion inspired by Victor Schauberger and Goethe and Steiner, these heroes of a bygone age, although not too far bygone, I'm asking the question, what cycle and what season are we really in now? And you may say winter, and you would be right. And you may say Aquarius, and you would be right. You may say 2024. You're probably wrong there. Because I think these questions are so fun to ask, because what happens when we revisit the markers of our generally accepted historical timeline? As you're likely aware, the year 2024 that people are dating everything right now, that clock began with the, how to put this gently, the fabricated timeline of the life of Jesus. This is Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. So we talk about 2,000 years since Christ, 2024 years since Christ. And to say nothing for the moment of the gross inaccuracy of that decision to start a timeline on then, and so much of that was dominated by the early Christian church. So again, before that we have BC, before Christ. I mean, it's so unbelievably random when you really think about it. And okay, so what bearing does that have on us today? Well, I entertain the concept that for us to be at this level of modern achievement, the level of consciousness that we do have, the ability to problem solve, produce everything that we recognize as essential to our human experience, to connect. Of course, whereas I'm quite critical that we're not doing that in a wholly conscious way as we could be. And part of that criticism comes from the fact that if you look at the early civilizations, pick a BC, whatever you want, you can call it 10,000 BC, 15, 20, whatever. If I'm spoiling some deep rabbit holes for you, I do apologize, but Steiner has written about the Atlantean Age. He was introduced to that, of course, from the Egyptians. So my point being, in terms of the discussion around time, there is a timeline, possibly many, or several at least. I really have no idea. But a precipitating era, or several, that would that would fertilize the ground for an Egyptian civilization to be so dynamically, intensely productive, erudite, sage, adventurous, dominating. I mean, they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. And I feel like that's sort of what we all learn from prehistory when we talk about the ancients, as if there was nothing before them, as if they didn't have seeds of consciousness and humanity that precipitated their epics. And so how are we going to change this? I mean, how are we going to take that knowledge and that curiosity and then apply that to our everyday existence and hopefully to redintegrate, to restore, going into what is, I hope, a time of spring. It's too early to get choked up in this podcast. I just need some water, if you'll excuse me. Because I believe that we're in a winter. I believe that the collective turmoil of the moment is probably an early winter. And I don't know how long those cycles last, although I do believe that there is an alternative outcome and maybe a rapid evolution that we can all bring about with shifts in our awareness and in our conscious choices to choose abundance, to choose integrity, to choose brotherhood, sisterhood. Those would really catapult us into hopefully. I mean, we'll have to endure some form of winter, and I mean, there's loss of life, there's environmental destruction, there's disease, there's enough factors consistent with a time of death and a time of darkness to support that hypothesis that I have. But as we turn now to a more optimistic, eternally so worldview brought to us by Goethe in the epic play Faust, which is every time I come to it, I try to get out of the habit of forcing myself to read things all the way through, or to hurry up and get on to the next book. But when I have delved into Faust before, there's always just, I mean, the story is a really brilliant one anyway, but the wisdom that shines through these characters is really incredible. And I forget who this is attributed to in the drama, but Goethe's words in Faust that I loved read, "For a spring abrim with songs is constantly reborn." A spring abrim with songs is constantly reborn. So you can read into that however you choose, but I thought that was a marvelous and magical way, and a mysterious way. I mean, there are hopefully manifold interpretations of what that means to you, and but even just with the limited language, of course, Goethe's writing in German. This is an English translation, so if I can detour for a moment to talk about the disconnect in words, I believe this is the case in German and certainly most romantic or call them European-based languages, and probably many others as well. I don't have any knowledge of Asiatic languages or Middle Eastern languages or African languages, but if we take Western world for a moment, we have this sort of Pig Latin version of English that we're all using now. And hey, I love to wield the English language as a sword to cut through whatever bullshit I can cut through. However, we miss out on a lot with our limited use and understanding of the English language. Case in point being that we have a gender neutral language, and in this day and age, hey, maybe that's a popular practice, a popular element of how we communicate, but I think it denies the masculine and feminine forces, and those are energies, those are forces. It's not about gender roles and historical expectations, patriarchy, matriarchy. It's not about that. And for some reason, I get an inkling that some of these things are deliberate in the collective consciousness. The Wetiko mind virus that Paul Levy writes about and I've spoken about before. These infections of our minds and hearts that certainly, unfortunately, go hand in hand with bodily disease. But you get something like that over the ages. Again, English, a very new language in the history of the world, and yet it dominates, and we think it's the end all be all. But here I am rambling about a beautiful English translation of some German words, but it's going to come up again in terms of how we interact with, again, our ability to communicate is the creation of our universe. I loved this from Eileen McCusick, she's many things, but her expertise is in the world of sound healing, especially tuning our bodies to the frequencies of the world and also our inner world as well. And I'll link to her work for sure if I can make a note so that I don't let you guys down, because she is someone who is worth turning into. And for you New England people, I mean, she's in Vermont. I believe that's where she's still based. And I think when last I looked it up, she was about a little less than an hour west of Stowe, Vermont. So she's up there, depending on your orientation. But Eileen McCusick shared this absolutely wonderful quote from a book she read called, what was it? The Tongue. Oh, shoot, I should have committed this because it was so great. Here it is. From The Tongue, A Creative Force by Charles Capps, in which apparently the author was channeling we'll call it the consciousness of Jesus, if not the person, depending on your belief orientation. But the line that was just so magnificent and really stilled me for a moment was that apparently Jesus said through this channel, "I have told my people they can have what they say, but my people keep saying what they have." Now, I want you to hear me. I want you to really dig this for a second when we're talking about our communicative powers, our ability to use the logos, the word, written, sung, spoken, whichever, read aloud. That's why poetry is way more potent when read aloud and recited and shared. Same with stories. We don't really do that anymore. So we're impoverishing our real culture and our ability to connect. But that quote is, "I have told my people they can have what they say, but my people keep saying what they have." And this is really the essence of manifestation and shifting our expectation with how we communicate. And I'll bring this up for everyone's benefit who's watching, because and as always, you can reach out to me and share this, or ask me to share this, because I think it's, to have access to simple things like this are really a game changer. And so this is another opportunity for me to have access to, you know what? Sorry, I'm all over the place, but we'll stop this for now. But this is something from David Avocado Wolf, of course, breaking down the power that words have. Of course, we're inundated with, I can't do this, I can't do that, I will never, I would never, too hard, impossible. I love that. I think it's Audrey Hepburn who gets the credit for saying, you can believe this or not, even though she was a famous actress. She said, "The word I'm possible doesn't mean anything because in it contains I'm possible." So I want to tie this into, if you are someone who practices or is embracing the potential of manifestation, the alternatives to maybe, someday, I wish, I hope, I won't, if only, I'll never, it's too hard, it's impossible. You would be amazed, and I hope you are when you do this, at the transformative impact of choosing your words more deliberately in your favor. For instance, you can choose to say, I am, I can, I will, I have, with ease, is effortless, I receive, I believe, I can be, I can do, I can have, and I can achieve anything. When you say, I have depression, I have diabetes, I have Hashimoto's, I have cancer. I know this sounds radical, but this is, I believe this has been proven to a large degree that the diagnosis, if accepted, it takes on a new life for a time. I mean, when we're talking about allegedly terminal illness and the perception that goes along with that, to embody that diagnosis, to make it an identity, to make it a power within you. Every time you say I have, I know you're trying to keep it real, and I know people confuse what I'm talking about with denial, and that's not it. I'm digging into a largely untapped resource, which is our ability to recreate our world. I mean, it starts as a thought. You have to have the thought conception of I am, I can, I shall, and then communicate that. Writing is extremely powerful. Speaking it, I would say equally so. I mean, I think the data is somewhat split in terms of repetitive writing. That's it's physical as well as mental as well as oral. So I mean, that certainly has a potency to it as well. But to speak it, I mean, to prayer, to sing. Eileen McCusick talks about this as well, that singing your prayers, singing your affirmations, singing your compliments to yourself or to a loved one, cheesy as it sounds, it is something that takes on a new life because you're bringing it into a higher vibration of expression. And so yes, tone is part of it as well. If you say I am gonna be successful, I mean, again, that's too vague. So you're really not cultivating clarity for your own benefit. But to bring this back to that line from Faust, a spring abrim with songs is constantly reborn. There has to be this auditory reception, this intonation that sings life into our experience. And in winter things get quiet. The birds are active first thing in the morning, but in these colder climates, a lot of them are gone. It's not quite as there's no bees buzzing. It's not quite as hyperactive as it is in the spring and summertime. And so again, how you can say that this sleepy phase of our lunar and solar calendar is the new year just bemuses me to no end, because there's nothing new about it. It's a continuation from, I mean, even if you take it from December 31st, what's new on January 1st? It's probably the same weather. It's a lot of the same habits and, again, our sense of calendar and schedule. If you're a parent, so much of it is rooted in the school year. And fair enough, because I know how that structures so much of people's lives. However, what's new about a new school year when all the content is the same, when there's no growth there. So because I'm trying to plant seeds for my mindset, hopefully for yours. I mean, I prayed today, as I'm about to borrow some wise words from Victor Schauberger that inspired me, but I pray before I sit down in front of this microphone to find the words that convey meaning, that are carriers of information and therefore light and energy to you. And however they're received, I mean, I only pray that it's positive and oriented to growth. And this is my opportunity to dive into these utterances dedicated to nature and helping to, again, restructure and reify, support a more holistic understanding. And so the book I have here is Nature as Teacher by Victor Schauberger. It's the second in a 3 or 4 part, I think it's 4-part series, which is really a collection of his works. Victor Schauberger lived 1885 to 1958. Believe he's an Austrian as well. Steiner was somewhat of an Austrian, more of a Hungarian, I believe, if I remember correctly. But these books are really epic. This is the first one I've picked up, but from my research into water, especially structured and live water, and the information encoded in spring water as opposed to the dead water of a reservoir, of a tap delivery system, say nothing of plastic water bottles and the like. Schauberger's is the name that rings throughout the era right now, and for good reason, because he displays this very, very jocular dismissal of the scientism of the time, which I of course totally dig, because it's only gotten worse, and you can only laugh even more heartily at what goes on now with the denial, with the willful rejection of nature's systems and the mystery, but also some innate understanding as well. And Schauberger talks at length about that, just how pathetic he saw it, that we were so obsessed with mechanistic definitions to explain why nature does what she does, that it took us out of any ability to access the wealth that's available in nature from an energy source like water. We don't have even remotely close to any relationship with the kind of water from energy that Schauberger was bringing to light in his lifetime. For instance, I mean, something from this particular book was when Schauberger wrote that nature is not served by rigid laws, but by rhythmical, reciprocal processes. So our rhythm and reciprocity of springtime, of this equinox upcoming, this is how we're supposed to operate. And if we have a year that is dominated, or even, I mean, again, since we work inside, and there's very few, I mean, being in real estate, there are quiet, I mean, even just from, you take a handful of years and compare them to another, there's totally cycles. But we often talk about the different seasonal markets, that spring is a time, okay, people have been hunkered down for the winter, working on Cape Cod. We know that people are more motivated in the springtime to either find a home by summer, or maybe people want to be done with the Cape and sell their home before summertime, before they have to deal with all the crowds, depending on where you live again. So, but for our work, it's often so rigid and monotone that we don't have the variety based on a season. I mean, it is ridiculously unnatural to be subjected, if you're someone who goes into work early in an office, to be bombarded with those fluorescent lights all day, and especially after the sun goes down. That'll fuck you up if you do that all winter long. Am I saying that we shorten the hours for workplace in wintertime? Yes, I absolutely fucking am saying that. Summer, I mean, you can work your ass off if you want, or it can be a relaxing, restorative time. I mean, more freedom is really what I'm after, to ebb and flow with these cycles. It's no coincidence that the moon is the push and pull, ebb and flow influence on the tides. We're ignoring these archetypes of rhythm and reciprocity. And again, it's a it's a misguided relationship with time to just be, to think that you're in a newness. And I'll only pause here to say, if you get up for New Year's resolutions, you actually do some shit about it, then great. I would never take that away from anyone if that's what lights your fire to, by December 31st, have A through Z accomplished. However, what I am promoting as I tune into the wisdom of others and try to cultivate it for myself is a simpler way of life that offers the fecundity of so much more vital life force energy. And the things that force us into rigidity or forced consistency with no responsive variety to a season, to a weather, to how you're feeling, to the up and down levels of stress, the up and down levels of activity, of responsibility. If we're not afforded that freedom, then we can really subdue and numb our intuition, our sense of feeling. That's often what we get just through that repeated experience with rigidity, to say nothing of eating dead food or alcohol, which is an essence extractor. That's what alcohol has been used as for longer than it's been a commercial drug. But here's another great insight from Schauberger when he wrote that nature avails herself of the biodynamic form of motion, which provides the prerequisite for the emergence of life. And I love that because I feel this, if you're watching the video, I'm always bopping around here in the frame because I want to hear and respond to that animating force that tells me you should not be sitting rigidly still for 30 minutes, an hour. Gosh, to say nothing of when, as a kid, you're subjected to those torturous chairs that they make you sit in. That's unnatural. Just plainly unnatural. And the honesty of nature, again, reveals motion. How do we know that things are in motion or alive in nature? We see some form of motion. I'm not going to get into what Schauberger believes about the life force that does exist in inanimate objects, but you see a tree move. Hopefully that reminds you that it's alive. A flower, of course, an animal running across your yard or the road. You say, okay, that thing's alive. And of course, this is the sedentary society. This is the society that is for some reason perturbed by regular movement. We think it's ADD. We think it's restlessness that needs to be curtailed. But we have constant circulation and motion going on in our body. Our eyes are constantly moving. Our lungs are moving the breath within us. Heart beating, blood moving, cells regenerating. That's all relentless, unstoppable motion until the body form dies. And anything that seeks to restrict that is anti-life. And I'll use this opportunity to mention this disturbance to me when I encountered in my recent studies of how many things are commonplace that are anti-life. For the most seamless parallel, the term antibiotic means anti-life, and it is employed to kill these things that have been determined to be bad bacteria, bad pathogens. A little bit of ego and hubris, I would think, to say that these things are bad. Of course, they're making us uncomfortable, and they're threatening our comfort. They're threatening our balance and homeostasis. Sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes they're serving a purpose. But there are myriad other ways to work with, not to defeat, not to kill any sort of biotic or bacterial presence within a body. To inject something ingest, I should say, although injections are certainly anti-life as well, to ingest something that is anti-life, that unfortunately it's a technology that has a widespread, it has a blanket approach. So it's killing the population in your GI tract, which is, that is the first line of defense, to initiate any sort of immune response, is if there's the consumption of something foreign, not just in your diet. I mean, a lot of things are processed through the overall gastrointestinal tract, that is for the purpose of digestion, assimilation, detoxification. That's a first line of defense. And the antibiotic technology can decimate what is supposed to be an 85% to 15% ratio of friendly versus unfriendly bacteria. It can level that. And anyone who has had more than a handful of antibiotics in their lives is likely suffering from some form of leaky gut or digestive issue. And yet it's considered to be this hallmark of modern medicine. And it's, for whatever successes are ascribed to it, it misses the mark in terms of its losses. Take another anti-inflammatory. The inflammatory response is protective. It is a signal to preserve any sort of, again, a fighting reaction. If it's something related to an injury or an ache. I mean, when muscles are trying to, muscles, especially muscle tissue, are trying to detox, they shut off or they weaken. And this often, because we're supposed to be using them, that can be felt as a pain, as an ache. And I mean, I talked to my tennis buddies about this because the prevalence of ibuprofen and other anti-inflammatories is astonishing. Just when you're sore from twisting and running and lunging on the tennis court, you need an inflammatory response. As we know, when it's chronic, that's when you get all sorts of residual issues. But you don't engage a chronic issue with an inhibitor like that. You don't take anti-inflammatories, especially. I mean, it leaves you wide open to the development of chronic issues anyway. So it's a vicious positive feedback loop. But again, it's a rejection of a natural process. It is trying to stifle an inflammatory response, which is automatic, and we can trust the things that are autonomic in our bodies. Last one, which is sort of small potatoes on this scale, antiperspirant. Your underarms are, and especially your ability to sweat there, because I mean, we can sweat through all our other pores, but there's something unique about that area. There's lymph, of course, related to the breast. And when you use an antiperspirant, there are scent masking natural deodorants out there that are becoming more popular, and I think that's a good compromise there. But something that mitigates your ability to sweat out of a place that is supposed to sweat, that backs up the lymph that has been associated with really high levels of increased occurrences of breast cancer or lung disease or anything like that because of that area. And again, you're stifling a detox system. Sure, it doesn't smell great or feel great, and maybe you go through a couple undershirts, or if you're a woman, you don't want people looking there, but it's just fucking natural. And these things, the more they come up to my mind's eye, they seem so obvious. Why would you ever try to deny something so natural? And yet you're considered the weirdo if you don't wear deodorant. But the motivation there, of course, is to just get yourself smelling right. When you're not detoxing high levels of toxicity and additives and things like that, then you smell just rosy. So no sweat, literally. Diving back into the beautiful inspiration of Schauberger, this is a must-have reminder for how we view capital N nature. When Schauberger points out that no dogma exists here, only constant flow, constant movement, and hence reciprocity prevails. So that theme of reciprocity comes back you only get that if there's a flow. You know, in the best of cases, it's cyclical, it's circular, and we love to stop things in their tracks. Again, water that's stored, that is not moving, becomes dead water. Things that sit on shelves for so long, or in warehouses, or and are then covered in the sorts of things that are meant to preserve that unnaturally long life. There's no flow there. The the birth control epidemic of trying to stymie the natural flow. I mean, again, to have a menstrual cycle every 3 months when it's supposed to be monthly. I mean, what sort of intervention is that for a woman? We're lucky as men. We're mostly the same all the time, but we have to go through cycles of high energy, low energy, action, abstraction, reflection. We need those opportunities to still be, to ebb and flow, but it is still constant flow. It is still constant movement, as Schauberger says, because as Bruce Lee pointed out long ago, not quite as long as Schauberger, but rigidity is death. Inflexibility is where we become brittle and fragile, and therefore we're easy to kill, we're easy to manipulate if we're so easily taken off of our center. The strongest trees have flexible trunks. They're subjected to high levels of wind that test their roots, but I mean that root system goes deep, but it's the trunk that we see that's subjected to the elements and to freezing and wind blowing, and yet they still stand there for way longer than you or I are ever around on this earth. This is another one. I'm rapid fire here only because there's a lot of depth that you can engage with for yourself, and I certainly implore you to familiarize yourself with Schauberger's work, because he was a champion, and because of his written works, he still lives on in that way. He was a champion of committing to the reversal, the death and rebirth of our society's hubris about natural systems, and then how we try to extract energy, resources, food, anything like that. He was a brave champion to reverse a lot of those perspectives, and he very freshly pointed out or reminded us of an apparently old saying, which said that originally everything was already here on Earth, but it all had to happen twice, precisely because humanity, both as a duality, born as a duality, is good and bad, wise and astonishingly stupid. And that really is a classic story that speaks to the constancy of abundance, that everything is here. But it's got to happen again, and we probably have to, or we definitely have to do some things differently to avail the abundance of the earth to us, instead of, I mean, we have an extraction economy, which we think is just going to give more and more, and it's just such, I'm sure people at the highest levels are aware of the scarcity that they create when they dominate resources and access and money, and money being currency, energy, and all that. And there's a finite amount of that. Whenever they print more of it, it doesn't mean anything. It just fucks everything up for you and I, who are subject to the whims of inflation and all the havoc that wreaks. But we have to learn these lessons again, is what Schauberger is saying, is because of our undeniable duality. It's not the whole story of who we are as souls and spirit, but certainly as bodies and humans, we have duality. We have the heart of the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man, as Solzhenitsyn wrote. And wisdom and stupidity is available to all of us, of course. Our most brilliant moments are often followed by our most baffling buffoonery. I'm certainly guilty of that on a daily basis. And as it pertains to nature, this is more the rediscovery, the reawakening, the rebirth that we're in now. And it's really quite exciting to see. I mean, that I get to be tapped into those communities who are going back to the land, who are making things simple again. Uh, Health is not complicated. It's become complicated when you walk into a grocery store and don't even know where to begin or where things came from or anything like that. But there are only a handful of core elements of health that make it simple. And we can, I believe, look to nature for the majority of that. And I mean, yeah, it's going to take some investigation and some stillness to have the wisdom elicited from within us. But I mean, gosh, what can be better than tuning into the nimiety, to the excess of information that nature offers us, if we're not deliberately, willfully ignorant to it. And last but certainly not least, this epic sentiment from Nature's Teacher that Schauberger wrote: through the rebirth of spirit, humanity will become accustomed to revere and care for all life arising anew out of the earth. And that is really our call to action for this upcoming spring in a few weeks, in a few months' time. But if we have visions of a springtime for our collective humanity and our future generations, to remember that through the rebirth of spirit, call it life force, call it chi, call it God, call it energy, through that rebirth, humanity will become accustomed to revere and care for all life arising anew out of the earth. The nudge toward reverence there, I love, to really embody the experience that life is sacred, all life. If it's alive, it's sacred. If it's here, it's sacred. And therefore, the innate responsibility to care for all this life that is produced from the earth and from the ether. That would just be magical. I mean, that would transform our whole experience to embrace that mindset and that heart set, that we are going to be the real stewards and caretakers, and we're also going to be reverent supplicants and honorees of honorers, I should say, of all the gifts that we're surrounded by that are free and that we didn't ask for and that we're still grateful for, to breathe the air, to have water to drink, to have food that often we don't have to kill or cultivate. Although if you choose to, I mean, that will only enrich your experience of being a being, of real sustenance, and not these, not the fake shit that we think sustains us, with that gratify the ego, with dollars, with job titles, with outward displays of attention, follower count, whatever bullshit metric you want to use. That's all meaningless when you don't have clean air, clean water, clean food. All of those are threatened right now. They're threatened. The earth, as well as we who are the denizens of it, have just an inconceivable resilience about us. And so does the earth, of course. I mean, when you're totally inundated with chemicals and heavy metals, pollution, it's astonishing we're not all choking to death. But that speaks to the resiliency of the water and air and earth qualities of the world, and then those elements, fire as well, of course, from the sun, all of that existing within us as well. That we have the ability to transmute all of this intense assault from really, really new levels of toxicity. I mean, most of this is 20th century, that we would have such intense levels of water pollution through pesticides. Food is the same, soil is the same. Now it's air pollution with heavy metals, the burning of jet fuel, mostly to be responsible for that, I believe. Uh, which is no conspiracy. I mean, all you have to do is look up geoengineering. Climate Viewer is a great YouTube account for a real education on that. But uh, it reminds me, when you have all of those things that are anti-life and are threatening our ability to have a sustainable future, despite all the greenwashing where so many products are said to be sustainably grown or sustainably sourced. None of that means shit. I mean, it can still be what you call sustainably sourced and still be full of chemicals and pesticides and rodenticides and herbicides and fungicides and kill you sides. But I love this line that occurred, that when things aren't adding up, you have to subtract. And so, I mean, that's a call to action for you to just take a. I mean, it's probably easier to do, and this is very much the case in the world of health resets and or just getting your health on track. The answer is usually not, or at least phase one is not take a bunch of supplements or do a bunch of new things. It's addition by subtraction. It's getting out of bad habits, bad dietary inputs. But detoxifying, as I learned, begins in the mind first. You need to have thoughts that are healing, that are wholesome, and not detrimental to you. And our thoughts are so easily distracted now with a 24-hour news cycle, with a similar level of access to any sort of information. I mean, that can all be very overwhelming, and it doesn't give us the space to center our thoughts and just bring them into, what do I want? And as Paul Chek uses as a template for thinking about our choices, and especially as they impact our communities and our people, if everyone did what I'm about to do, would it be considered a good thing? If everybody eat locally, biodynamically, organically farmed food and cattle, would that be a good thing? I believe unequivocally yes. If everybody had a commitment to cleaning and maintaining and drinking the best forms of water, would that be good? Yes, I believe so. If everyone had the freedom to work a job that, as long as they're working at it and committed to it, it's enough to sustain them in their lives. Yeah, I mean, I think those are hopefully none too controversial enough on this podcast. I like to pick at some low-hanging fruit to make it easy, but we have an opportunity to ask those questions of ourselves, to say who's to say when we get these dictates, when we're told what's good for the climate, what's good for a community, what's good for a nation, what's good for a season, especially in the midst of a crisis. How you can often tell that a crisis has been manufactured is when there's a one-size-fits-all response almost immediately afterward. And I mean, I think that's been prevalent, to say the least, in the last couple of crises. Certainly there'll be some more that we'll have to be more responsive, not reactive to. And we can only do that when we have patience about us, an openness to the different energies of masculine and feminine, that yes, sometimes we need to be the yang force that is doing and expending energy. And that's a great time about spring and summer, is you're planting the garden, you're cultivating it, you're outside a lot, sweating and staying, being out later or up later because the sun's up later, being up earlier because the sun's up earlier. That's a magical time. But in these yin times, like a winter, we might need to kill some things. We might need to, or let some things die at the least. Let some systems, institutions, habits, ego practices, let them die, if they're not going to serve the best in me and to serve the best in you. And as I said, I believe we're in a winter now, but I'm going to leave you with one last bit of word magic that I learned. And this is from a guy, Pete Maglia, who's has I would say, an entirely unique and novel way of looking at the symbolism of our Latin alphabet characters. And his synthesis of that has turned into this rubric for, it's not exact, and I'm very new at this as well, but these are just some really transformative words associated with the word spring that I wanted to share with you. That the S is associated with vibration, because that S looks like a waveform, which is how we register visually a vibration. P is to perceive. R is to reflect. I is an incarnation, because of the lowercase I, you have the dot, which is the one source, and then you have the stick figure down from that, the individual. So that's an incarnation of the one source. N is to normalize, to structure, to bring into balance. And G is spirit. And so with spring, we have elements of vibration, a new perception. As always, our reality is reflected back to us. New incarnation from the time of if not death, just absence. In a spring, we aim to normalize new practices, because there's some level of newness, and we want to bring it into our shared experience and consciousness. And spirit, as Schauberger said, it's through the rebirth of spirit that we'll come to revere and care for all life arising anew out of the earth. And it's worth an explanation. I'll link to a great podcast that Pete did where he went through those letters. But it was just a fun exercise that I did in anticipation of this, because that word spring always holds so much promise. It's the time that I look forward to. I was born in the spring. I'm a Taurus, right on the Aries cusp there. It's an earth sign, so I'm naturally interested in these elements of my experience, but it's not mine alone. I am bringing you a lot of my own conceptions as they occur to me. Some of them are unique. Some of them are clearly inspired by one other source I wanted to share, which I thought was just fascinating, because I picked up this dictionary of literary symbols by Michael Ferber, which is a ton of fun, because when you read, especially older novels and literature, there are these themes and these motifs, and a lot of them are typified by symbols, poetry and ancient art as well. And if that piques your interest, this is a great resource to have. But this was, sometimes you get a book like this, any sort of reference book, or there's a couple different versions of this. The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd, the Dao De Jing, a lot of spiritual texts are like this. You can even treat the Bible like this if that holds meaning for you. But to come to that text with either a blank slate in your mind, or if you have a question, and to approach it with that question and hopefully a revelation as an intention, and just open to a random page. It's so serendipitous and so fun what can be revealed from that. And so my fun in anticipation of this podcast was to open this literary symbols dictionary, and I opened to the term leaf. And one great historical literature reference that came up was from the Iliad, in the simile used in the speech of Glaucus to Diomedes, when Glaucus said, through the voice of Homer, "High-hearted son of Tydeus, why ask of my generation? As is the generation of leaves, so is that of humanity. The wind scatters the leaves on the ground, but the live timber burgeons with leaves again in the season of spring returning. So one more generation of men will grow while another dies." And that very real, raw, hopefully stirring literary reference is what I'll leave you with here today, that there's going to be all sorts of death, and it's nothing to be afraid of. It's part of our flow. It's part of our life. We can feel a loss, and we can feel the resistance that comes up with that, but a surrender, a trust in the return and the rebirth and the service that a death does to new life is a worldview that I choose, because it's more inspiring, and it begets new life of ideas and feeling, and then very actually the creative force, the yin force. But if I had any final asks or encouragement, it would be to get ready for the real new year. Still seek out the sun when it does come out this time of year. Feet on the earth always, to not just ground you for that connection, but to get that electrical charge. And then as you do that, as seasons change, you tune into when you start to really feel the change. And as long as you recognize that you're not the same person as you were when you started this podcast or when you woke up today, that you always have eternal spring awaiting you, and you can sing yourself into a new existence. I hope that's the most inspiring encouragement that you've heard today. And you know I'll have more for you next time when you come tune in with me. But thank you, as always, for sharing your time and your ears with me. I hope these were the words that brought you the very best of what I've seen in this life, and that it can live on with you and through you and circle on back to me.